So let's talk about this latest album. I believe this is your fourth album. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
And it's called An Outlaw Stand, and it came out on January 7th through Season of Mist.
Indeed, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about when you started working on this album and how the songs came together?
Yeah, we started working on ideas and stuff sort of mid-2019. I started demoing some ideas, and then we put that on hold because we went on tour in Europe for 3 weeks with Destroyer 666, Dead Congregation, and Inconsensus from the UK. And we put the writing process on hold so we could sort of get organised for that. But when we got back from the tour, the idea was let's ride that kind of momentum that we'd generated within the band throughout that tour. And so we were pretty deep into the writing process, by early 2020. And then we were sort of looking at times to record, like we'd planned, okay, we'll probably start recording around April, May. But then the pandemic hit. So that kind of changed all our plans. Originally, we'd planned to record the album as a full band over the course of a couple of weeks. But in the end, because of restrictions and lockdowns and all that shit that was going on here, it ended up being that I recorded all of the rhythm tracks at home on my own. And then the other guys recorded their lead guitar parts. And then once restrictions and lockdown had sort of come to a bit of a pause, we got together and we recorded all the vocals, and then we had a couple of sessions mixing, so on and so forth. So it was very kind of disjointed, and it wasn't how we intended to record the album. But, at the end of the day, we had to work with what we had, like we had to deal with the circumstance and carry on. It wasn't easy, but at the same time, a little bit of opposition sort of creates a bit of determination, I would say. So we pushed through, and I think the results of the album sort of speak for itself in terms of, where we were at as people and as songwriters, because I think this album is the most sort of vicious thing we've released. And I think the whole scenario surrounding that actually contributed to that, because we actually wrote a lot of material in the middle of the pandemic. There was stuff that was being written for the album that in the end was scrapped in pursuit of stuff that sounded like it was fitting more to the direction that we were going in with this album. So I definitely think the whole pandemic thing played a role in how the album sounds, So that's not actually a bad thing either, because I think it turned out pretty fucking wild, and that was the objective with it,
You mentioned that An Outlaw Stand is the most vicious Nocturnal Graves album that you guys have released. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like how would you compare this album to, let's say, your earliest releases?
Sure. I think, like, in terms of the sound, after the previous album, Titan, we spoke about that record and reflected back on it. And the one thing that the band as a whole, as a collective, the one opinion was it's too clean sounding. For us, that's my biggest gripe with that record. I think the production is a little bit too clean for what we would normally go for. And so this one, that was one thing that we were very conscious of changing. We went for a much rawer sort of guitar sound and the drum sound as well. We wanted something that sounded a lot more sort of untamed and rough, So in terms of the productions on the previous records, I think through years of recording and messing around with sounds and so on and so forth, I think we've got a much better idea of how to get the sound that we want. The first album was done in 2007, and none of us had a lot of experience with the technical side of recording, like gear choices and pulling the sounds that we wanted at the end of the process. It was very sort of, you go in and you start recording and you mix and so on and so forth, but you're just mixing and taking what you recorded, as opposed to really planning out what sort of sounds you're gonna commit to take. Whereas on the last one, we were really conscious of that and shaped the sound throughout the process so that it becomes what we envisioned in our heads, rather than kind of just putting the album down, doing the recording and shaping it to sound, that sounds good. There was a lot more planning went into this one. And I think that just comes down to experience.
So I should mention that the album was recorded at your own studio, IHQ.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Have you performed all the recording duties for Nocturnal Graves since the beginning?
All of the releases except for the first album and the first single that we did. The demos were just done on like a four-track recorder that I had at the time. But 2011, I started this home studio setup that I've got. And since then, everything we've recorded has been here at my place in my home studio,
So I ask this question a lot of people who are both a member of a band as well as the engineer/producer.
Yep.
But are there additional challenges to performing both roles?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest challenge is that, in the past when I've recorded for whatever other band I've been playing in at whatever time, once the drum parts, for example, are done, then it's easy to walk away for a bit, come back, go record your drum parts, leave for a few days, come back to the studio, check out what's going on, hang around, blah, blah, blah. You come and go as you please. But when you're in the process of, when you're also having to do the engineering and stuff, you're there for the entire process. You're there for the writing, the rehearsing, the recording, every single element. You've got to be present and engaged in it. And I guess the hardest thing can be that you're sometimes dealing with feeling burnt out. That's actually why this album took a lot longer to record than we had originally planned, because of, I had to spend time practicing the drum parts, for example. Like that took a couple of months to get the drums up to speed to record. And then once that was done, I hadn't picked up a guitar in months. So then I had to go back through that process and get my guitar playing back up to scratch and so on and so forth. So that takes time, and there were a few times along the way where I needed to take a week or two off the process and kind of recharge, because I was also in the middle of a lockdown that went for months. So living remote and, a few hours away from the other guys wasn't possible to, just even spend a weekend just, catching up with the other guys and talking about where we're at with things. I was here in isolation, working on it for months, which sometimes led to a little bit of burnout, I would say. But, at the end of the day, this is what I do for my regular income as well. So I really can't complain about the situation. It's just a matter of balancing things, really.